Okay, 2 mornings ago, Professor David Meyer made psychology fun, if you can believe that, in a presentation two mornings ago. So he might even be able to make hearing loss fun. So we'll see. Anyway, uh, Professor David Meyers is a social psychologist who has been a member of Hope's faculty since 1967. I was just out of high school 6 years at that time and still going to college. So that's a long time ago. He's the author of A Quiet World, Living with Hearing Loss, multiple psychology texts, and dozens of scientific writings in both academic and general audience magazines. He received a master's and a PhD from the University of Iowa. So without further ado, Dr. David Meyers. Okay.
Thank you for welcoming me back. I really should be seated out with you at age 81, but as I explained at the end of the last session in response to a question, I have a rather odd position in that I'm not yet retired, but if you're donors to Hope College, I want you to know you're not having to fund my salary because I've worked without a salary for the last 26 years because the work is self-funding. And as Bill has indicated, my vocation is really reading psychological science and communicating it to the world through various means, including textbooks. My avocational passion has to do with hearing loss and the psychology of hearing, which I find utterly fascinating, and I want to share some of that fascination with you today. Hearing is an amazing sense, and yet it's the Cinderella sense. It's the poor sister, if you will, to vision. It's not fair. Vision gets 10 times the cortical brain area devoted to it. There are millions of photoreceptors in the eye and only about 16,000 neural receptors, those hair cells in the cochlea that we'll be looking at in a moment. And yet it's a pretty awesome system. Imagine, if you will, an alien species that could pass thoughts from one head to another merely by pulsating air molecules between them. Is this a science fiction movie? Actually, it's us, because right now my vocal apparatus is generating air molecule waves that go through space that strike your eardrum, which cause the bones of the middle ear to vibrate, which send fluid-filled waves throughout the cochlea, which bend the cochlear receptors, those hair cells, sending nerves up the auditory nerve, neural impulses to the auditory cortex, where the brain decodes that. And so it's a magical system, from air pressure waves to mechanical waves to fluid waves of the inner ear to electrical waves going up to the brain to the sound that you're now perceiving. If you were designing the system back then, would you have designed so intricate and complex a system? Could you have imagined it? It is truly marvelous. It's mind-to-mind communication via vibrating air molecules. And yet, because it's a complex system, if something goes wrong at any one of these stages, then we don't hear. We're left out. Nevertheless, I want to start by just saying what an incredible, beautiful, complex system this is. As the psalmist said, we are indeed wonderfully made. There's not only a physiology to hearing, there's also a psychology to hearing. I gave a couple of these examples on Monday. But what we perceive of the world, as I was illustrating the last time, visually is partly bottom up, as our sensations inform our brain, provide it with information, but also partly top down, as our expectations shape what we perceive. And thus, as I illustrated last time, most people see this as saying a bird in the hand, because that's what they expect to see, when in fact, that's not what it said. Or whether you see this intermediate figure as 13 or as a bee depends on the context in which it's provided. Perception is top down as well as bottom up. And that's true of hearing as well. There's much more to hearing than meets the ear. So if I tell you about a couple I know that's been troubled by their experience with some bad sex, what you hear depends not just on what I just said, but what's in your mind. And what I just said was some bad sex. However, you bring your own assumptions and top-down expectations to what I'm saying. The interpretive brain, by the way, in a microsecond, can fill in the gaps and make sense of ambiguous stimulation. So if I tell you about a meteorologist What did you just hear? A meteorologist or a meteorologist? Will depend on the context. Whether you hear Rhapsody or Rhapsody, the stuffy nose or the stuffy nose, depends on the context that shapes the expectations that determine what you're hearing. This girl's grandmother responded to her wanting an iPad. And she was a little let down at Christmas. So hearing is top down. By the way, this works to our benefit. Some of you, if you have any hearing issues, you should definitely turn on captioning and just as the default setting on your TV. So a really curious thing that happens with captioning. It makes the sounds clearer. I have sometimes been watching a captioned movie with my kids who are a little irritated by the captions. And I say, I'm hearing just fine. I don't need the captions. As soon as they turn the captions off, the words become fuzzy. But if you know what the words are, it helps you understand them. And that's one reason captions work so beautifully. Well, a number of us do live with significant hearing loss. I'll tell you a bit more about my own in a moment. By various estimates, depending on whether it's self-report or actual audiological examination of patients sampled across the country, about 50% of Americans have hearing loss. About 1.25 billion worldwide have at least a 20 decibel loss. And it is the great invisible disability. Think about this. If we had rooms on campus where people couldn't get into the facility for a lecture like this because they were in a wheelchair and it wasn't wheelchair accessible, people would be aghast and we would deal with that immediately. If a facility is equally cognitively inaccessible because you're sitting out there in the middle of the room and you can't hear the words, that's invisible. People don't notice that. And so it's not that they don't care, but the society doesn't deal with that because of its invisibility. And yet there's a great number of people whom this affects, and it's age-related, as you well know. So most people by their mid to late 80s, some 90% are dealing with measurable hearing loss. And among those on Medicare, age 70 or older, about 2 in 3 have discernible hearing loss that could be helped with today's technology. Just a little story about my own familial hearing loss. My grandmother was significantly hard of hearing, and she gave that to my mother, and the least of her gifts to me was this very same hearing loss. My mother was completely deaf after her late 70s. Without today's technology, we had to communicate by writing on a magic pad, or I would write on a laptop and turn the screen to her. Otherwise, she was simply cut off from the world. If I take this hearing technology that I'm wearing off, I could not hear the sound of my own voice speaking to you right now. Now, there's some advantages to that, I must say, in that tomorrow night when I'm on an overnight flight to Dublin, Ireland for a meeting this next weekend, I take off my hearing technology, and if there's a baby crying or whatever, the sound of the plane doesn't bother me. If I'm working at a coffee shop downtown and I want to focus and I don't want this, I can just, by pushing some buttons, turn the volume way down and I can be in my own little world. I could sleep in a hotel without distraction from car sounds outside. On the other hand, we have one of those newer cars, you start and stop with a button. And I can't tell you how many times I've left the car running because I can't hear it. And if you've ever wondered how much petrol a car consumes if it's left running all night, it's about 1/4 of a tank, I can tell you. I've left our garbage disposal running because I, even with the technology, simply don't hear it. And why don't I hear? It's because a University of Iowa medical geneticist told me, somebody with whom I sat on the advisory council of the National Institute on Deafness at NIH, he looked at my audiogram and he said, I think I know the gene that's causing your hearing loss. And so he FedExed me some spit tubes and I got the result back of the specific gene mutation that has caused my hearing loss. That immediately caused me to ask him, well, if you know the gene mutation that causes some people's hearing loss, could you, with a child or a young adult, use CRISPR gene modification technology to prevent that, what I'm experiencing? And indeed, that is now being done in some experimental innovations. And that was part of his plan too. He said, that's where we're going. I don't understand how they could do this, but he said, we can do the gene modification in one ear, but not the other. And thus the person will serve as his own control condition within the confines of this experiment. So this is more of what's coming in the future. What is the experience of hearing loss? Well, it is to audition a little bit what this is to vision. It's taking stimuli and kind of blurring them, if you will. You still get the light, you still get the intensity, but the sounds just kind of run together. The ship left on a 3-week cruise may come out as kind of indecipherable. I got plenty of volume. I can hear the sound. I mean, when you turn up the technology, but I have trouble parsing the words within that sound. If you have your hearing tested, and a hearing instrument specialist or a professionally trained audiologist will show you your audiogram, which is the frequency, the decibels deficit you're experiencing at each of a variety of about 13 different frequency levels, from low frequency to high frequency. And what you're seeing here is the typical high frequency age-related hearing loss that most people experience in later life. That, by the way, is unfortunate because consonants are mostly carried by high frequency sound. Excuse me. And consonants carry most of the meaning in speech. If you take out the vowels, you can often still discern the meaning, but if you take out the consonants, you don't know what's being said. So let me play you some speech. First, without anything being extracted.
The thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all.
Now let's hear that again with the high frequency sounds extracted.
That perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all.
So you still get the volume, but you have trouble parsing and discerning the words within that volume when the high frequencies sounds are extracted. And that's normal hearing loss. So if you're wondering whether you or somebody you care about are hard of hearing, how would you know? Your typical response is to say, well, actually, I do fine, thank you. If people will just speak up, if they'll face me, if they'll take off their mask, if they'll speak distinctly, if we're in a quiet rather than a noisy setting, if everything's right, you and I hear just great, don't we? We don't have a problem. And yet we sometimes cup an ear to hear, or maybe we have family members telling us when we're watching TV, oh, you've got that awfully loud. That's a clue. Or in conversation, we sometimes experience that others seem to be mumbling, or we ask people to repeat, or we ourselves talk loudly, which I tend to do. And I was in just a week ago to have my cochlear implant updated, and there was a little problem, and I was getting less input than I should. And my audiologist, before she even tested, could tell that there was an issue because I was talking a little bit too loud, as my wife tells me I often do. But by the way, she wears hearing aids, and if I'm having trouble hearing her, I will say, will you please take out your hearing aid so I can hear you better? Because then she talks louder. Or we don't talk. I mean, you can imagine the situation where you're in a prayer meeting, all heads are bowed and everybody's mumbling their prayers quietly. You don't participate because you don't want to talk over somebody else or interrupt or say what somebody else has already said. And another thing you tend to do, and you have to do it. I mean, this isn't a bad thing. It's necessary. I mean, I've done it today, even in the context of this room in conversation with one of you. If you can't hear, and it's just kind of trivial, you know, nice chatter, you fake hearing. I mean, you kind of read the person's face and you make a judgment as to whether this is something that needs to be repeated and I really need this information, or the person is just being kind to me and I'm going to be kind back to them. So that's the experience of hearing loss. There's emotional consequences to hearing loss. Surveys done by the National Council on Aging have found that hearing aid users who have mild or severe hearing loss are at somewhat more at risk of saying that they're feeling sad or depressed, but that's especially so if the yellow bars, they are not taking advantage of hearing technology. And likewise, when it comes to participating in social activities, people who are hard of hearing, but have hearing technology are more likely to engage in social activities than those with the same level of hearing loss who have not dealt with it. And people with mild or severe hearing loss who wear hearing aids are less likely to say that people get angry with them for no reason than do people who have hearing loss but have not dealt with it. And in fact, there's a whole set of quality of life benefits that have been associated in research with hearing aids and cochlear implant, from decrease in various sorts of negative emotions, such as you see listed here, to an increase in various positive conditions, overall health, cognitive function, emotional stability, social engagement, which is so important for us as creatures who have a deep need to belong. The cognitive consequences of hearing loss have gotten a lot of attention recently. Inspired by research by Johns Hopkins researcher Frank Lin, who has found that dementia is more prevalent in people with severe hearing loss. Their brains have less input and apparently have atrophied in some sense. And a new meta-analysis has confirmed this, although it's not a huge difference, but there is a 19% decrease in the risk of long-term cognitive decline associated with the use of hearing technology. So it's just kind of good brain health to have audio as well as visual input to your brain. Well, if all that's the case, why don't more people who have hearing needs wear hearing aids? Why aren't hearing aids like glasses for the ears? If you have vision loss, you deal with it 100%. You got glasses or contact lenses. There are, depending on who's doing the counting and how they're counting, some 38 to 48 million Americans with hearing loss, but only about a quarter of them have hearing aids. And why is there on average about a 9-year delay after hearing loss before people actually deal with it? It has to get kind of bad before people deal with it. One popular explanation, which I don't subscribe to, is that these folks are just in denial, sort of like alcoholics who won't own up to their addiction. They're in denial and it's a kind of a psychological repressive mechanism. But actually, there are many simpler explanations for why that might be. First, if you don't hear something, you don't count it as a miss. Somebody, I think, as I was out there, said my name from behind, and I kept walking. Then they said my name louder. So if somebody says my name and I don't hear them, they count it as a miss against me, or my wife will too. But I don't count it as a miss because it was a non-event for me. Likewise, you and I are aware of what we do hear. And in certain situations, we do just fine, thank you. We're also ignorant of other people's experiences. We have nothing to compare to. Our experience is a private experience. I don't know what you experience. And also, it's so easy when we do have issues to attribute it to something external, to others mumbling, to their soft voice, to the noise in the situation. And finally, think about it. We don't notice hearing loss because it doesn't change abruptly, unless you get, say, Meyers disease and you lose hearing, your hearing goes like that. Boy, you will be to an ENT physician within a week, I guarantee you. But if your hearing loss is not noticeably discernible, different one from 1 month to the next, you just never notice anything that's changed. And finally, there's the issue of cost. First of all, I'm wearing about $60,000 of insurance provided hearing technology, thanks to cochlear implant surgery 1.5 years ago. But even if you just have high-end digital aids, you're looking at more than $6,000 probably, although there's very low-cost startup hearing aids. And these low-cost over-the-counter hearing aids that are now approved by the FDA can be like $300 or so. I mean, they're kind of generic. I mean, they're not high-end. They're not personally programmed to your needs, but they're better than nothing, and it's a starter for many people. So why do so many people who could benefit from hearing technology not use it? One other reason is vanity, and the hearing industry has responded to that by giving us and advertising invisible hearing aids. The best invisible hearing aids of 2023, according to audiologists. Invisible Hearing Solutions advertises one audiology firm. I've had the privilege of speaking to hearing professionals, and I showed them samples of these ads, and I've said, really? Is this the public education your profession wants to do? to tell us that hearing loss is something to be profoundly ashamed of, something you can hide, not something you should remedy with the best available technology, but we can help you hide your embarrassing hearing loss. So come to us, you poor old person. This to me is the hearing profession at its worst. And I'll tell you about it at its best, but that's at its worst. But it is a fact that a visible hearing aid takes us out of the closet as a person with hearing loss. It is, as I've shown you, associated with aging. Although, actually, if we're to care about our social image, it turns out that our hearing loss and the faux pas related to it may be much more conspicuous to other people than is our hearing aid. By the way, one of my favorite experiments in my discipline of social psychology is on what's called the spotlight effect. Cornell University researchers put a dorky Barry Manilow t-shirt on a sample of people and had them engage in conversation with others. And then later asked them, do you think the other people in the conversation noticed the t-shirt you were wearing? And like slightly more than half thought that others noticed, whereas most others didn't notice. We're very self-conscious. If we've got a bad hair day or if something's not right, we think everybody else is noticing, but actually everybody else is really concerned about themselves and they're really not noticing. And so that is called the spotlight effect. We all think we're in the spotlight of other people's attention, but the bad news and the good news is that we're really not. And if you mess up and say something stupid, or you miss a social cue because of your hearing loss, that's much more noticeable than as you're wearing a hearing technology. Well, if you've got somebody you love that has hearing loss, what can you do for them? What can you do for folks like me? Well, you can invite us to quiet places. People will say, or they're taking me out to dinner, what kind of food do you like? I say, I can eat any kind of food. What I really like is a quiet restaurant, a booth in the corner, a place where I can hear you. Or you can rephrase if we're not hearing you. We are natural lip readers. What we hear is a function of both the auditory input, but also the visual input. Just as taste is actually a combination of both what goes in our nose and what hits our tongue, so also our experience of sound is a function of what we see as well as what we hear. And now I'm going to give you a powerful demonstration of this. And what you're about to hear, the sound will never change. It will always be the same. But what you hear the person saying is going to change if you look at him. Now, in the second half of this, if you close your eyes partway through and don't look at him, then it'll flip back. But as long as you're looking at him, it'll change. Here we go. This is called the McGurk effect, after the name of the psychologist who explored this. Ba, 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 ba.
But look what happens when we change the picture.
Ba, 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 ba.
And yet, the sound hasn't changed. In every clip.
So that's the McGurk effect. It seemed to be changing from ba, ba, ba to fa, fa, fa. But actually the sound never did change. It was only our perception of sound. So because hearing is visual as well as auditory, if somebody's not hearing you, we can rephrase the words. Now there's some rephrasing that won't be confused. You might try forming some of these words with your own mouth. Tight and fight will never be confused because they look so different. They're formed so differently. But try to discern through lip reading the difference between caught and got, sip and zip, toe and dough. They look just the same, but the difference is formed farther back in the mouth. And so those words, you can say them again, and they still will be confused. So it might be helpful if somebody's not hearing you to simply totally use different words. Do you want something from the store? You're not hearing that? Is there anything you want at family fare? I mean, you just say it in a different way and people may get it. And you can also create a context with visual aids. So in this presentation this morning, everything I'm showing you, I'm kind of captioning in a sense. I'm telling you what you should expect to be hearing and hoping that that's assisting your comprehension. You can also do as I don't and speak more slowly, parsing your words. Whatever you think of Hillary Clinton as a politician, she is very good at parsing her words. And you can like that about her. And if you're not sure if we've heard, ask us. We may not tell you because we don't want to, make an embarrassing situation, but we'll be honest usually if you tell us. What you can also do for us is create quiet spaces with sound absorbing materials. The Washington Post, the week of July 4th, will be carrying in its print edition an article on noisy restaurants, to which they allowed me to write a letter of response, which they tell me they're going to publish, in which I described my suggestion in my book long ago, A Quiet World, Living with Hearing Loss, of what the world could give us, which is coffee shops and restaurants that were designed for hearing, with carpeted floors, acoustical tiles, fabric on the walls, maybe booths and so forth. And in fact, we're going to call this chain of coffee shops A Quiet Place, and it's going to be hugely successful. And my last sentence of this letter is, entrepreneurs, take note. If you build it, we will come. And so I've sent this, appeal to the folks at Hops 84 when they were redesigning 84 East. You've got 3 different sections of that restaurant. You've got several hundred retired people living within a walking distance of you, many of whom are living with hearing loss. Why not design one of those 3 rooms to be hearing friendly? And I offered the same unwelcome, I'm sure, advice to the wonderful new couple that has created the new Good Earth Cafe. Again, the tables are far apart. That's great, but it's an acoustically terrible environment with hard floors and hard ceilings and so forth. And it's like, what is it about architects that design restaurants today? What have I done to offend them? I mean, they absolutely despise people with hearing loss and have no empathy for the experience that we're having in those contexts. They could do so much better. Anyway, excuse my rant, but that's so second thing is, if you're giving a presentation and you're trying to decide whether to use a mic, do not ask the question, can everybody hear me? There is only one answer to that question. Think about it. The answer can never be no, and it never is no. And thus, oftentimes, they'll see people nodding their head and they'll put the microphone down. No, please. I do need for you to answer that question. So if offered a mic, use it, hold it as Bill did this morning, close to his mouth. That was perfect microphone etiquette. And then there's things that we who have hearing loss can do for ourselves. We can be out of the closet. I'm a person with hearing loss. It would really help me if we could have a table in a quiet corner, or it might be possible to turn the music down just a bit. Assert yourself. Let your accessibility needs be made known. We can choose quiet places, quiet restaurants to visit or whatever. We can choose to sit in corners. We can group seats close together, because how will you hear is majorly determined by the speaker to listener distance. And there's a kind of a geometric mathematical formula that has to do with that. So if people come to my house, for example, for a gathering, I'd love to have them close around the dining room table, not spread out around our large living room. This meeting I have at 11 o'clock today after this, I've scheduled for a room in the Hayworth with a small table that puts us close together. I could have elected a much bigger table, a more elegant room that would have us farther apart. But speaker to listener distance needs to be minimized. Be bold, sit front and center. Just take that seat. You actually need it. And use captioning. So I presume the Zoom version of this meeting that's going out has live transcript activated. It doesn't mean that it appears on any screen, but it means that anybody who's listening to a Zoom meeting can simply click on a button. And thanks to the wonders of today's artificial intelligence, there is captioning of what I'm saying, virtually simultaneous. By the way, you Zoomers, if you haven't tried it, click on the live transcript button. It's just to the right of the middle on the lower bar of Zoom. And that's what that little thing does. I'm in a virtual book group with some great psychologists. And so I always have the captioning running. I can actually size it bigger than that. So if I miss a word, all I have to do is look up and see what has just been said. And in fact, it has a whole record of the whole meeting too. So I can look back and see what was said 10 minutes ago if I want to quote something back. It's really cool. Well, we have other cool technologies. We have caller ID on our phone, which is really helpful when somebody's calling, because the one thing they can't rephrase in different words is their name. It is what it is. We have phone systems that are volume controllable, that give us an added volume boost. We have phone captioning now, and there's an app you can have on your phone, such that if you're having real trouble hearing people, you can have the words displayed visually on either your home phone or your cell phone. For a time, I used a binaural headset, which I have in my office. By the way, if you hear a phone conversation with 2 ears rather than 1, it is way better. If you have trouble, or somebody you care about has trouble with phone conversation, it really helps if they can listen in 2 ears. By the way, today's cell phone technology, which uses a private Bluetooth connection to hearing instruments, will also enable binaural or 2-ear phone reception. And that's a great thing about it. You can turn on the captioning, as I indicated earlier. When you see the words, you can also hear them better. It's just a really weird phenomenon. And you can avail yourself of today's hearing technology. Back in my mother's age, hearing aids were analog aids. Today's hearing aids are digital hearing aids, the ones you get from hearing professionals. And they do some really cool things. First of all, they can selectively amplify the sound you're not hearing. So if you have high frequency hearing loss, they can boost the high frequencies more than the low frequencies. They can customize the sound. They don't just amplify sound, they customize it to your needs. They can suppress background noise. So again, depending on the setting, but if you're in a noisy environment where there's a hum of air conditioning, it can suppress that sound and prioritize the human voice. They have a potential for directionality. My default setting is directionality. So if I look at Bill and we're talking after the meeting, it prioritizes the person I'm looking at and downplays people off to the side. But that also means that I tend not to hear people who are calling my name from behind me, which my wife thinks I need to hear, but I think I need to hear the person I'm looking at most of all. They also do 2 other things that I'll unpack. They offer sound compression, and they offer the technology that we're using in this room right now. First, sound compression. What sound compression does is take sounds that are too soft and make them louder so you can hear. But there are other sounds that you hear just fine. And sometimes, like I'm at a loud basketball game and it's so loud, I think this is so loud for me. What is it like for people with normal hearing? So sometimes we want that too loud sound to be brought down. And that's what sound compression does. Elevates soft sounds, brings down too loud sounds. And then the last thing I mentioned that is available in nearly all cochlear implants and more than half of hearing aids today is a certain technology that is really, really cool. By the way, the assistive listening technology that is prevalent in the United States in houses of worship, in movie theaters, in lecture halls, and so forth, is hearing aid incompatible. It's either an FM or infrared system that receives a signal and then transmits it to you through a little cigarette pack size receiver that connects to either earbuds or a headset that is incompatible with your hearing aid. So here's the deal. If you're at a movie theater and you're having trouble hearing, you can check out one of these units. And then you have to, first of all, if you're in worship or at a lecture or at a play, you have to get up out of your seat. You have to take the initiative to go find this thing and convince somebody that they have it, because they have to have it under the Americans with Disabilities Act to loan you the equipment. And then you wear this conspicuous equipment that is incompatible with your hearing aids and delivers the same generic sound to everybody, regardless of their hearing needs. That's the American model for assistive listening. And these systems rarely get used. The ADA mandates them. They have to have so many units for every so many fixed seats in any facility that other than a worship facility, which is example that has 50 or more fixed seats. So for example, the Muskegon Civic Auditorium didn't have this technology, and a person with hearing loss reminded them that you are required by the ADA to offer assistive listening. So they bought these assistive listening units and installed it. And she was the first person a year later to make use of it. They had to unwrap the cellophane package when she came back a year later. I asked at the Holland 7 Theater Complex, how often do these units get used? They're not very effective delivering their generic sound, by the way. And I was told about once per month per theater. They've got dozens of these units gathering dust, their batteries getting faded in boxes in the theater, and they're by and large rarely getting used. If only we could do it differently. Imagine if we could harness what we call the human factor in human factor psychology. Technology that's going to get used is simple technology. Imagine that if I'm having trouble hearing in the theater or at a lecture in a room like this, imagine that all I had to do was tap a button, and instead of the speakers being in the ceiling, they were inside my ears with my hearing technology, broadcasting exactly the sound I needed immediately. No fuss, no embarrassment, completely convenient. Well, that's possible. That's what's in this room. And it can deliver sound that's customized to my needs. The typical hearing loss pattern is the one on the left. My hearing loss pattern, this is from some years ago before it got worse, is on the right. It's a reverse slope, a low frequency hearing loss, which made me the subject of neurological examination at the University of Iowa Medical School some years ago. But I have different needs than you do. And so but my hearing instruments will customize what I need just as they will for you. By the way, coming later, I'm going to say more about this technology, but I also want to say that coming later this decade is a new technology called Auracast. It's a low energy Bluetooth. It's a new low energy Bluetooth technology that will transmit in the DeVos Fieldhouse, for example, to anybody, particularly if they have a smartphone and can receive this signal. Your Bluetooth, this is different from the Bluetooth you think of. If you have Bluetooth on your phone that transmits to your hearing aids, that's a private one-to-one communication. Auracast is a one-to-many. It'll broadcast to anybody. And if you're in a sports bar and there's like 6 different games going, you'll be able to pull out your phone and hit a button for which of those games you want to listen to. And it will then be broadcast via your phone up to your earbuds. And so this is a really cool, geeky thing that's coming. It'll be in 2027 that the international standard for the broadcast signal will be defined. And after that, we'll start to see it take off, I think. But in the meantime, there's another available technology that has been around for a long time, and it's now available in new forms. And that is what we call here the hearing loop that's in this room. And its key ingredient is a little $2 part, a magnetic receptor called a telecoil or T-coil that comes in my hearing instruments. Doesn't add anything to the cost of the instrument itself. It's a cheap little part, and all it does is pick up a magnetic signal, and it comes in essentially all the cochlear implants that are available today. You probably didn't know it, but landline phones transmit not just sound, but also this magnetic signal that for those, when they activate their telecoil, can hear better. And so if I'm listening to on a landline phone, and I turn on the telecoil and turn off the microphone, my hearing aids are, like if I'm in a noisy airport, shut off the airport sound, and now the phone magnetically communicates with the hearing instrument, which is why some people have called it their telephone setting. But I first experienced this in a public facility in 1999 at the Iona Abbey off the west coast of Scotland. As I sat there and as sound reverberated around that environment, by the time it got to my ears, it was indecipherable. I could not hear a word that was being said. My wife noticed on the wall a hearing assistant symbol with a little T in the lower right corner, indicating that it was telecoil compatible. I had new hearing aids, which had this little magnetic receptor, and she nudged me to push the button to activate it. And I can't tell you, it was like, whoa. I mean, I was virtually in tears. Suddenly, this crystal clear voice was talking from the center of my head. And it was like, man, this is just amazing. And you don't have to do a thing other than to touch a button. My hearing aids were now customized loudspeakers, delivering direct sound. So I came to become aware that this technology is prevalent in the United Kingdom and throughout the Scandinavian countries. It's everywhere, unlike the United States. If you buy your ticket at the Tower of London from the person behind the glass window, if you touch the button, her voice will be broadcast by your hearing aids. Likewise, if you buy tickets at British railway train booths, if you go to St. Andrew's Post Office, where I just was a month ago, and need to talk to the clerk behind the glass window, her voice will broadcast through your hearing aids, thanks to the hearing loop technology. In an era where more people were wearing masks and blocked off, this became a really helpful technology. It's in all London taxis, where if a red light comes on, your voice may be heard by the driver, thanks to the hearing loop, and you can hear the driver. There's a little pinhole mic in the dashboard that picks up the driver's voice. London buses have it at the entryway, so you can talk to the bus driver. Drugstore pharmacy counters have it. Here's at Boots, which is a counterpart to Walgreens here in the United States. Virtually every British church I've been in that has a PA system, and all the British cathedrals have this technology. And so for the state funeral of Her Majesty, the very first announcement in her funeral program was the church is served by a hearing loop. Users should turn their hearing aid to the setting marked T. The good news about hearing loss is that if you have hearing aids and have this technology and go to Westminster Abbey or St. Paul's or Canterbury Cathedral or any such place, you will hear better than anybody else in that cavernous, reverberant environment because the sound is being broadcast from right inside your ears. On Monday, I had a Zoom call with the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., which is close to adopting this technology and installing it, which they can do. They're a little anxious because it means cutting the grout between the tiles to lay the wire and then regrouting. But that's been done, in many, many places. And so I think it's going to happen at the National Cathedral sometime within the next year. By the way, they also explained they're in the midst of an organ renovation, which my church, Hope Church, is. It's taking 5 months or so for the organ renovation, Hope Church. The organ renovation with 10,000 pipes at the National Cathedral is taking 5 years to take out all those pipes, rehabilitate them and reinstall them. Just a little incidental information. Anyway, go to Canterbury Cathedral, whatever. It's everywhere. Go to airport checkout counters. This technology is everywhere, and it's almost nowhere in the United States. And it's like, duh. We've got some cool ideas that we experience here that they could really use over there. I've spent about 3 years in Scotland, and so and there every year, and so I could teach them a thing or two, I think. But boy, they could teach us a thing or two. So I came home from that experience, and I thought there's a few scattered hearing loops in Rochester, New York, and a few other places, but by and large, it was unknown technology in the United States. So the first thing I did was install it in my home TV room. It's just a little $300 amplifier that connects to the audio out of the TV, and then a wire runs from it that encircles where I sit. I just stapled it up on the ceiling studs on the basement beneath, and you sit inside that area. And so if you come to my house and watch TV with me tonight or right now after this meeting, the TV is absolutely silent. It's making no sound. I hand you the remote and I say, dial whatever sound you want. It has no implications for what I hear. Because when I want to listen to TV, I just touch a button and the TV speakers are in my ears. And I also have not just a telecoil setting, but a mic plus telecoil setting. So I can also leave the hearing aid microphones on if I want, so I can have a conversation simultaneously or hear the doorbell ring. Here's somebody experiencing this for the first time. Press the button on your hearing aid. And that's many people's experience. There's an audiologist in Santa Rosa, California, north of San Francisco, that has installed this in 2,000 patient homes, home TV rooms. And he surveyed a sample of his patients, asking them how satisfied they were with their TV listening. And as you can see, on a 5-point scale, most put 2 or 3. They struggled to hear their TV. But once this technology was installed, most people gave a 5. They could hear the TV as clear as a bell now. And he also asked them how satisfied they were with their hearing aids. and most people gave it 3 or 4, they were moderately satisfied with their hearing aids. But if their hearing aids could serve an important second function as in-the-ear speakers for broadcast sound, now they have doubly useful hearing aids, and they're happier with the hearing aids. And by the way, they're then less likely to return the hearing aids. We sometimes joke there's like 3 kinds of hearing aids. There's ITC, that's in the canal. There's ITE, that's in the ear. There's BTE, that's behind the ear. And there's ITD hearing aids, that's in the drawer. And so some of you are laughing knowingly. One research project interviewed or queried almost 900 people who've experienced this technology in a public facility, asking them in non-loop situations how well they heard. And as you can see, from a 1 heard nothing to 10 heard every word, people are struggling. People with hearing loss, hearing about a 5 on average. But with this technology installed, as it is in this room, they're giving a response of 9 out of 10. So just huge difference. Here's another example of a woman who's going to experience this for the first time. By the way, what she's holding is merely what activated the button. She's not hearing through this. Just watch her though. I have this in my office, so if somebody calls me on my landline phone, it can broadcast through my hearing aid, so I can take phone messages here without even needing to hold the phone to my ear because the phone is broadcasting through the technology to my hearing aids. Well, so my little idea was, could we dream something better in the United States? And so what I did is sort of my avocational passion for these last 2 decades is first create a website, which is hearingloop.org. It's now been taken over by somebody else, but it's who's developing it further. Hearingloop.org has all kinds of information related to the technology, wrote about 3 dozen articles and gave talks and so forth, and undertook a local initiative that made Holland-Zeeland, Michigan, the model community for hearing assistance for the United States. And the test was just to see if this could work on a large scale, and thus encourage other communities to do the same. So we undertook an initiative with some financial support from foundations to help co-fund local nonprofits and worship places that would install this. And the response was fantastic. First of all, I have to say the churches led the way. Sometimes in today's culture, I mean, religion, particularly, in certain contexts, is getting kind of a bad reputation. Here in Holland-Zeeland, Michigan, the churches were the first to say, yes, we want people to hear the word, quite literally. And other institutions in the community followed. And as a result, you can see virtually every worship place and public auditorium in our area of 100,000 people or so, Holland and Zeeland and the surrounding townships, has this technology installed. It's not in DeVos Fieldhouse, but otherwise it's in virtually all the public auditoriums of Hope College, for example, including the Moss Center. And it's spread. It's in both concourses, all the individual gate areas, and now the outer waiting area of Grand Rapids Airport. The largest installation is the 12,200 fixed seats of the Michigan State basketball arena. But it's spread beyond, thanks to a national initiative that was then embraced by the Hearing Loss Association of America, which is the nation's voice for people with hearing loss, and the American Academy of Audiology, representing professionals, and by a volunteer network around the nation that has worked together to get America in the hearing loop. Here's a couple examples of the 2 leading states of this initiative, although it's everywhere. Our Michigan, where we now have known more than 700 venues that have this installed. And thanks to evangelical audiologist, Saint Juliet, I call her, who is the Hearing Loss Associations of America kind of traveling hearing loop evangelist now. There's nearly 900 installations across the lake in the state of Wisconsin. Following, however, the example that was set here in Holland, Zeeland, Michigan. It's in New York City subway booths. It's in New York City taxis. The city of New York is now requiring the installation of this technology in all new or renovated facilities where public assistance in hearing is needed. It's coming to all New York City airports. The U.S. Supreme Court chambers has it. And we've had wonderful publicity in trade magazines that have given this visibility, in the public press, the Chicago Tribune, AARP magazine, Science Friday on NPR, the Wall Street Journal, and most importantly, it was a front page story in the New York Times, which really put the whole effort on the map, which came about because I happened to, my publisher had a son who works for the New York Times who's connected to the science writer. And anyway, it was just kind of, we managed to get something in, and it was just a wonderful result. Our hearing loop task force also has developed a relationship with Google. Google gives you information on Google Maps about where something's located, but it also gives you information about the facility. And so you can click on About when you come to any facility, and it will give you accessibility information. And the one hearing accessibility information they will now give you is whether or not it has a hearing loop. That's the one option that for hearing accessibility that Google now offers, because they became convinced that this was the technology that the nation needed. So we've kind of had this little mission. We're just a kind of a bunch of volunteers for the most part, but why not dream big? See if we can take this hearing technology and bring it to the nation. Now, if this doesn't persuade you, or if you can't really afford even over-the-counter hearing aids, I do want to tell you about a low-cost alternative that my wife found in the Vermont Country Store. Had $9.95. That's your option. I did actually buy these, and I'm sorry to report that they don't work nearly as well as the $60,000 of equipment I'm wearing. So there you have it. And Bill's going to take a mic around, and I'm happy for the next 25 minutes or so.
Questions, comments?
I have two things. First of all, one of the reasons restaurants don't have softer surfaces is because they want you in and out of there fast.
Right.
for
They want a high
turnover.
energy environment.
Yeah, and they want turnover so
Right.
that they can make more money. The second one is more personal to you. Is how long have you had your cochlear implant, and how it helped out? I mean, what made you decide to get it, etc.?
Yeah, so, a lot of people, their hearing declines to a point where hearing aids really don't help much anymore. And that was the case with me. And I had been told, no, you're not, you have too much residual hearing in your left ear to qualify. But then I go to church with one of my neighbors who's an ENT physician, has done some cochlear implant surgeries. And I was asking him, how do you know when somebody reaches that point? And we chatted a little bit, and I just went on. And about 3 days later, I got a call from his office, invited me to come in, and they put me through some tests. And he now has a colleague that does these. And we have a call. We're blessed here in Holland with a cochlear implant surgeon who was trained with Frank Lynn at Johns Hopkins, the world center for doing this technology. And he's done more than a couple hundred here in Holland. And so I finally decided several things. One, I didn't have a lot to lose because the hearing was so poor out of that left ear that I had more to gain than to lose. My wife, she wouldn't have done it. She didn't want anybody, because you'd have this surgery and then the hearing's just about completely gone now. I mean, there's almost no hearing left in that ear. But the second reason I did it is that if I was going to do it, I wanted to do it before my auditory cortex began to atrophy by lack of input. I wanted it to be still alive, if you will, and I wanted to have more years to enjoy it. And finally, I've written about cochlear implants and stuff, and like, I just kind of like wanted to experience this. And so I did it. It turned out, I mean, I almost hesitate to tell people my experience because I don't want to set others' expectations because others' experiences have been different than mine. But about 4 weeks after the surgery, you have to heal, so you nothing. It's just you're just dead in that ear for about 3 or 4 weeks, and after about 4 weeks, you go in, and they turn you on. And the very first words she said, I mean, she put an earplug in this ear, so the only thing I hear there was, "What is your middle name?" And I could answer the question, and it's like, and my within a month or so after that, my word comprehension had gone dramatically up. And she told me it was the best result they'd seen in that office. I mean, it was so dramatic. Most people take months to adapt to this new sound before they're getting really satisfying results. Not everybody has a satisfying result. Mine was immediately gratifying. Most people find it very helpful, but it takes time and it takes patience.
You do see it with the pictures they show of babies who are
Yes.
completely deaf and
Right,
suddenly
right.
hearing
And of course,
sound.
they're not hearing words they comprehend. They're hearing sound for the first time. And that was like corresponding to my experience at the Iona Abbey. When I pushed that button, and it was like, whoa, where did that come from? You know, I mean, so I kind of had that baby's experience. And with babies, by the way, they'll want to do that surgery very early in the preschool years before the brain has been deprived of sensory input for too long, in which case they'll never hear naturally, just as if you go without hearing language for too many years, you'll never be able to speak fluently.
Go to the second microphone over here.
Okay,
If you would pass that to people
Right.
who are raising their hand on this side. Okay, next.
Okay, I'm visiting an audiologist in about a month. And I got a survey from them of things that I was supposed to answer. And one question really kind of irritated me. It was, do hearing problems cause you to attend religious services less often than you would like?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I don't have any problem hearing there because it's a great service, but I have found I'm not going to Hope College Repertory Theater this
Oh, yeah.
summer and
Right.
things like that. And it's like, is that a normal question to ask? It seems like it was kind of offensive to me, like that's the only thing they were concerned about.
Yeah, I would think they might have asked it in a more generic way.
Right.
Are there things that other public events or whatever you don't attend
Right.
because you have trouble hearing? So I would have thought, but rather than presume that everybody attends religious services,
Right.
because not everybody does to begin
Right.
with.
So
By the
I
way,
would've said,
by the way,
so-
in a public setting, like DeWitt Theater, for example, so there is a hearing loop system in DeWitt Theater, but that system and any other system is only as good as the sound that goes into it. So it is essential that the actors be mic'd, as I am right now, and that sound feed the system. So I attended a play recently. The loop system was on, but there was not sound from the actors feeding the system.
well, and I found like when they turn off or to the back of the stage or to the side, I just can't hear it.
Yeah,
So,
but if
but-
you have hearing aids in this system,
right, but I
it,
don't,
it,
yeah,
it should not matter if they're facing you,
right.
if they're distant, if they're close to you. You should be getting exactly the same clear sound. But you need two things for clear sound. You need the sound to be picked up close to the mouth, and then you need the sound to be delivered, not from 8 feet away or 10 feet away, but from right inside your ear. And if you have both of those things, you'll love it.
As one who has moderate hearing loss who has not been treated, what is your recommendation for the next? What should I do first? And I have good health insurance.
Okay, so if I were in your situation and I were curious, what I would do is, first of all, I would visit I mean, this is a little my bias, but I would visit a professional audiologist, somebody, most of whom have an AUD, like the ENT office here in Holland, or Holland Doctors of Audiology is an excellent audiology clinic here in Holland. And have your hearing assessed. And what a professional audiologist will then do is tell you what the degree of your hearing loss is and make a professional judgment as to whether or not you now would benefit from hearing technology. And if they're consummate professionals, and the people I've just mentioned are, they won't sell you hearing aids. And the testing is free usually. They won't sell you hearing aids that you don't need. I mean, I just had a friend in Adrian who visited an audiologist in Toledo that I put him on to. And the person said, you know, you could be serviced right now by just over-the-counter aids. You're not to the point where you need to buy aids from me. That is like such a respect-worthy professional that would pass up several $1,000s of income to do what's right for the patient. Once you get the hearing aids, if you decide to try them, to experiment with them, under state law, you have the right to return them at no charge for, I don't know, it's a month and a half, 45 days or so afterwards. So that's part of the state law is you don't have to pay for them until you're satisfied that they're making a difference. Yes.
Hi.
Yep.
I have exceedingly sensitive hearing, and I find most places uncomfortable. And I usually walk around with little wax balls in my ears that I pull
Right.
down and up to cover sound that's always all over the
Right.
place.
Environments are often too oppressively loud for you.
Yes, yes. Is that an indication of potential hearing loss, or is that just my luck?
I don't know. And so, again, I'm a social psychologist and advocate for hearing assistance. But that, I mean, that's something I would talk with a professional audiologist about. But there are some people who are just acutely sensitive to stimuli I mean, it may be of various sorts.
Mhm.
And you know, and by the way, I would say even as a person with hearing loss, a situation could be oppressively loud for me. It's not lack of volume often, it's being able to carve meaning out from that volume that defines the experience of hearing loss.
Okay.
So again, I wish I could be more definitive, but
Just curious.
but a professional could, ENT physician or audiologist could surely be helpful at answering that excellent question. And from the Zoom,
Yes, one of the people home wants to know, do all hearing aids these days have the T-coil technology installed, or is this a technology, there's a special order?
it's not special order. It comes with most, and it's available with most, but it depends on what hearing aids you get. Any hearing aids you buy in the Holland Zealand area, if your hearing instrument specialist or audiologist doesn't equip you with telecoils, that's like professional malpractice because they're so useful here. And so anybody here should be routine. But then the audiologist also has to activate them, because in your hearing aids, you're going to have 3 or 4 different settings. You can have a setting for directionality. You can have a setting for noise suppression when you're in the car. You can have they've got to give you a channel for the telecoil activation. And so if they don't, some hearing aids have it, but the hearing specialist hasn't activated the technology.
Yes. My question is about tinnitus.
Yes.
I suffer from it. Both of my brothers, my mother.
And it's a symptom of hearing loss.
Yeah. Well, we talked Monday a little bit. I used to teach psychology, and the theory is that as you lose hearing, the brain makes up stimuli
Right.
to replace what's missing. But how do hearing aids deal with tinnitus?
First of all, so tinnitus would correspond to phantom limb sensation. So if somebody loses a limb and the brain loses its input from that modality, it starts to make up its own activity, and the person may experience something that they can't be experiencing because they don't have the limb. Likewise, if you lose hearing, the brain doesn't just want to lie quiet. I mean, it kind of generates its own activity in the form of phantom sounds that are really kind of bothersome. I mean, it's kind of, and so if you hear better, if you have sound coming in and the brain is occupied, then you experience less tinnitus. And so hearing aids are a partial remedy for tinnitus. But again, an audiologist would be a hearing professional, and I would defer to them. Maybe there's an audiologist here. I mean, often one shows up when I give this talk. So.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
What can we do about the high price of hearing aids? Is this unique in the United States or is this worldwide? Considering where technology has taken us and the low cost of so many things that you can buy today, the LED screens, TV and all, for several $100s, and a pair of good hearing aids costs $6,000 to $7,000. And insurance, for the most part, doesn't cover
Correct.
it.
It'll cover a cochlear implant. If your hearing's bad enough, it'll cover it. But if it's below that, insurance won't help you.
What can we do?
So first of all, these over-the-counter hearing aids are the FDA's affirmative answer to your question. It is possible to manufacture the stuff in mass more cheaply and to sell it. So you can go to drugstores here in Holland and buy these introductory hearing aids. One thing I would say on behalf of, okay, you can also go to Costco or something like that and pay less for hearing aids. But the professional service you get is not the same as if you go to one of the offices I've described. So if you go to Holland Doctors of Audiology or Van Doren Hearing Centers in Zealand or whatever, that $6,000 doesn't just buy you a pair of hearing aids. It buys you repeat visits without charge for, I don't know, I have to look at for several years to come. I mean, once I've paid for hearing aids, I have never, I mean, I've gone back, I've had my hearing aids cleaned, I've had my hearing retested, I've had the hearing aid adjusted, I've had, you know, twice a year follow-up visits. I never pay another dime because those professional services are all bundled with the initial cost. Now, there's some thought that you should, maybe you could charge people less if you unbundle the services and then you charge them every time they come back. But then that tends to discourage people coming back for follow-up visits, which are a good thing. So there's, you know, there's both bundled and unbundled options, but I like the bundled. I like to just not have to deal with money again for the next several years when I go back. When I go visit, I was in recently, just no question about money changing hands. So you're buying professional care for a multi-year process. That's part of what that $6,000 is.
David Blatt, any thing online? Question, comment,
Yes.
right behind you.
I have been told that hearing aids that are rechargeable are not compatible with the loop.
No, I don't know why that would be. I mean, that's just a question of whether the battery that
That's what I
operates
thought.
them is internal or whether it's rechargeable. So I've never heard that, and I can't imagine why that would be the case. I will say on the option of rechargeable versus chargeable batteries, I will say the cochlear implant here has a rechargeable battery, but I have a couple spares if something runs out, you know. I don't think I'd like a rechargeable battery for my hearing aid because I don't want it to run out. If this runs out, like if this were to run out 30 minutes before this, or just as I got up to talk, I could quick stick in another battery. I don't have that option if it's a rechargeable battery. So, but that's just personal preference. I mean, it's.
Other question? One over here. Steal a microphone.
When the 11-year-old was suddenly unable to hear because we have that ability, could the brain back up and start where the baby started with beginning to separate sounds and understand how to understand language? Or were you saying, nope, the time is past where the baby could still do, where the baby could do it, the 11-year-old couldn't start from zero and
Right.
go?
Right. So if you take a baby that's born completely deaf, and you don't give that baby new hearing aids, but then you do to that baby as an 11-year-old, that child is never going to hear like that child would have heard if you, before they acquired language, before the critical period for for the acquisition of language if you had given them a cochlear implant in their second year of life or at age, I don't know what they do at age 1.5 or something like that. By the way, cochlear implants for babies are a very good thing if you're if you're hearing parents, and a very bad thing if you're deaf culture parents. So there's great controversy because
Yeah.
it's kind of cultural genocide to the
yeah.
deaf culture. I had the privilege of speaking at Gallaudet University, which is the National University for the Deaf, a couple times. And on one of my visits, I asked my colleagues over lunch, have you ever known of a deaf of deaf child? A deaf of deaf means a deaf child of two deaf parents who elected a cochlear implant for their child so that child could be part of the hearing culture. And they came back, no, they had never heard of a single instance of that. Whereas you and I, as hearing people, if we have a child, we want to be able to talk to that child and have that child be part of the hearing culture. And that's a good many of the children that are born deaf have hearing parents who are electing cochlear implants, whose children therefore will not be part of the deaf culture in the future, which means that the student population that Gallaudet University can recruit from is the declining population. And they were talking about needing to recruit more internationally because of the declining number of signing Americans, thanks to cochlear implants
Right.
for children of hearing parents.
Okay.
That was a long answer, but
No, but most of us are aware of the great battle going on in the deaf community over sign language. For decades, there's been a huge argument, of course, as you know.
Right.
About the education of various kinds
Right.
of deaf children.
yeah. And I mean, sign language is a real genuine language. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. It's great to have signer, but for how many years have I seen graduation ceremonies or whatever with a person signing, and who knows if there was a single person in that audience of 1,000 that was receiving it, while there were dozens of people having trouble hearing and nothing being done to support them. And like, I'm for support for everybody, including people with hearing loss who want to hear. And there's cool technologies that enable that to happen, and the United States could do better.
More questions, comments? I have a little anecdote I'd like to spread. Susan and Sandy and I went to DeVos Performance Hall to see To Kill a Mockingbird. The sound system was in connection with the telecoil was terrible. You actually asked to be moved to a different seat. Is that correct?
My experience was that I was very frustrated because I was not hearing well at all. And of course, we were in the upper mezzanine seat. And so as I was walking towards the, just to go downstairs and just play with my phone to do whatever, I passed where they had the assistive devices. And they said, oh, put one of those devices on and you'll be able to hear. Well, I've got hearing aids with ear molds and it just wouldn't work. So they offered another seat in the orchestra section.
That
So I
works.
was in row H.
Okay.
So I could lip read and I could hear and everything was fine.
Right.
And I did talk to the director of communications at DeVos. And she said they were checking in on it. But they talked about the fact that this play was not a loud speaking play. But I questioned whether there was something wrong with the loop system, that
Right.
it wasn't connected
Yeah,
properly.
and it's quite possible that the loop system was working fine, but the actors were not mic'd.
Exactly. Well, they were mic'd, but you couldn't hear them well
Yeah,
at all.
okay, but that mic has to be feeding the system, garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly.
So I mean, that's a great anecdote to bear in mind. I mean, things can go wrong. The system doesn't always work, but you know, we have a wheelchair ramp into the building where I am, and sometimes it's snow covered and you can't, I mean,
Mhm.
it has to be kept in a working condition in order to work. And that's not
Exactly.
an argument against hearing loops. It's not an argument against hearing wheelchair ramps, that they sometimes become cluttered. The last thing I just want to say, just that, again, I wanted pay a tribute to this community and its worship places and auditoriums and facilities managers and so forth, has just been a model for the United States. And I think Holland, Zeeland, Michigan can take some pride in its support for people with hearing loss as being kind of the model community that many other communities in the United States have looked at. And I think we can all take some pride in that, and kind of the good-heartedness. So many good things happening in Holland, Michigan, and that's one. You know, it's not just snow melt. We're cool.
Anyone else? How many people here have the telecoil either in their hearing aids? Okay, a few. The telecoil works great in some venues and not so well in others. And the people who are responsible for operating the telecoil quite often don't really understand what they need to do and how they need to verify that it is functioning properly. So don't be shy about complaining to management about the telecoil system. Brand new buildings usually have the wire loop positioned in such a way where it works fabulously well. Jack H. Miller is an example. Some other places like theaters and so forth, where it's been added later, works less well. There are times when I use microphone and telecoil together, and that works, but the telecoil by itself is muted. And I don't know enough about the technology, but be sure and complain. It's a big deal, and they spent some money installing the equipment. They may not have put the training into the people they should have. So,
yeah. By the way, I'd say just one other thing about it costs more than an infrared or FM system, which works fine to the AV guys who install these things. They just plug it and they put on the headset and it works for them, and they assume their experience is our experience. And because it costs less, facilities often prefer that. I say the metric that should matter is cost per user. If you install a system that costs, you know, $1,000 and one person is using it, and you have an alternate system that costs $4,000, but 10 people are using it, the cost per user is less for the more expensive user-friendly situation. And again, in this room, it's worked fabulously. So when I ended my talk and you started talking, all I did was push a button and to activate the telecoils, and your voice from the microphone was broadcast to my hearing aids. And it's just, I mean, again, I am stone deaf. I take off the hearing equipment. I cannot hear my wife on the pillow next to me unless I put my right ear right against her mouth. And yet in this room, hearing you, sweet, you're all sweet. I have to have you talk in here.
You spoke about the TV room and the
Right.
recoil.
Right.
Where can you get those devices?
Yeah, just online. I mean, you could buy, yeah. And by the way, if you email me, I could give you the name of somebody who could come install it for you in your home. But you can also, I mean, somebody actually gave me an amplifier, but you can buy an amplifier online for, I don't know, $300 or so. But you have to, I don't know, you either have to run the wire, or you have a teenage grandson or something like that who can.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
Anything else?
Yeah, thank you. By the way, if you have hearing aids with Bluetooth reception, you can also get a Bluetooth transmitter to it, and that's very easy to attach to your TV audio out to a broadcast to your hearing aid Bluetooth reception. One thing about that is normal Bluetooth sucks a lot of battery power. And so you're going to go through, if you watch a lot of TV using Bluetooth, you're going to go through more batteries. Maybe that'd be a reason to have rechargeable. So anyway, thanks. Great fun for me to be with you.
I learned some new things. A bunch of us learned some new